I now call on Senator Pauline Tully.
Good to hear that, and good afternoon, Minister. So there's a number of issues I just want to raise from the budget from yesterday, and so the first one is in relation to childcare. So we know that we have 40,000 plus children in need of a childcare place now. And I regularly have parents on the phone to me or into my office crying because they can't find a childcare place, which means they cannot go back to work. And it in particularly affects young babies and children up to the age of 2. But it's across the board. Now, the government has a proposal that there will be extensions to schools and community centres to address this. I really do not understand this proposal because, I mean, how long is that going to take? We need the places now. It's urgent. We know of schools that require additional classrooms at the moment, and they're being held up by the building section within the department for months and months and maybe years. I'm not sure about even the community centres and what's the idea behind that, because, okay, I can see the sense of combining schools with preschool education, and there needs to be more collaboration and cooperation between those two sectors. But I don't feel that that's going to actually address what is a very urgent problem at the moment. And I just thought expanding the building blocks scheme would be much, much better for both, for existing providers to allow them to purchase existing buildings and renovate those. And it would also deal with the large degree of vacancy in many of our towns and villages and in our communities. In relation to education, again, there was a commitment given in the programme for government to reduce the pupil-teacher ratio. We have one of the highest pupil-teacher ratios in all of Europe, and yet this has not been addressed in this year's budget. There was talk of bringing it down to 19:1. We have many classrooms with 30 plus students, and that's not fair on the teacher, it's not fair on the students, it's particularly not fair on the students who may have an additional need and are in mainstream and trying to keep up, and it's increasingly difficult to do so in a large classroom setting. Now, I know not all classes are the same, that size will depend on the number of students and their ages, but I mean there needs to be an effort across the board to reduce that to benefit all of our school community. In relation to capitation, yes, there's an increase of 50 for primary school children and €20 for post-primary, but it isn't sufficient. It falls short of what's needed because there's increasing costs. There's been years of underfunding in this sector, and then the cost of living package for schools is actually off the table as well. And schools are increasingly having to go to the financial support service unit for assistance. So it's not going to address the needs that they have and the chronic underfunding of our schools. Also, I welcome the therapies in school. I think it's the right way to go. I would love to have more detail on that and how quickly that's going to be rolled out, because again, that's an urgent need. We know that the CDNTs and the primary care sectors are not working at the moment. They don't have the staff to provide the services that children need to benefit in life and in school. And where children spend most of their day in the school setting, it would be a really good idea, and I've been advocating for this, and I know Michael Monaghan knows that for years. We were on the Disability Committee together and we discussed this very often. So it is the right way to go, but it's just how quickly we can do that. And also, where are the therapists going to come from? Because they can't be found to fill the vacancies in the disability sector in the community. Now, I will guarantee that people would prefer to work perhaps in a school environment than they will in those teams, because unfortunately those teams, because they're understaffed, it's a very difficult place to work, and many people are not opting to work in those. So I do want to see that working. In relation to school transport, we had statements on school transport last week, and I know that it mentions about increasing the capacity by 100,000 by 2030. There was no increase this year, and there's no increase for next year by the looks of things. I mean, there was 173,000 students accommodated this year. It mentions 170,000 in the budget there. So we're talking about okay, a little bit less, but I'm presuming it's in and around the same. So, but there's no increased capacity, and we really need to see that increased capacity to facilitate students to get to school and get them into the good habit of using buses and public transport. And in relation to the JESH Plus plan, I'd love to know more detail on that as well, and just if applications for JESH will be reopened, because there are many schools who don't have JESH status, and it's very hard to understand why, because their neighbouring school does, and it's the same area, same profile, and they just would welcome another opportunity to apply for that. In relation to disability, I mean, all of the main disability organisations have come out and expressed their disappointment at this budget. All of them had been advocating for a cost of disability payment that hasn't been provided. €10 per week is not sufficient to address the significant needs out there. I mean, price of groceries and energy are continuing to rise. There's no one-off payments this year. Joe McCarthy of the IWA has indicated that people will be on average over €1,600 worse off this year because of this budget, and that's very concerning. Now, I know there's been an increase in funding for services, and that is long overdue. Again, I'd like to see the detail on that, and much of that will be done to address, increasing costs and wage increases. But then not all disabled people avail of services, so it's not going to benefit everybody in the disability community. So again, the detail is important to really realise how much that's going to impact on people. In relation to the student contribution fee, I mean, it might be a permanent reduction, which I welcome, of €500, but it's still less. There was a €1,000 reduction last year, so that is still going to impact students who are finding it very difficult to cope at the moment because, again, the student accommodation is just at a chronic stage at this stage. And I'm just, again, would like to know how much investment is going into student-specific accommodation as well for our universities and our technological universities as well, which are crying out for student accommodation, are very willing to provide it, but don't have the funding to do so and need the ability to even just to borrow to do so. The drug task force, there's been a reduction in the budget from 11.6 million to 8.7 million. That's extremely disappointing. I mean, increased last year to 11.6 million from roughly 8-point-something million as well. And it's really, really disappointing to see it slashed again. And I mean, it's lower now than it was 20 years ago. I mean, Sinn Féin had committed to 21.7 million in our alternative budget. And we need to address this problem. There are people there with chronic drug problems who want the support and the help to get away from the drugs, and it's having an impact on our society. We need to be investing in that. That's investing in our people and in our communities. And just in relation to health, again, the breakdown, like the disability, is a little bit unclear. It's not. It will become clear, I presume, but 220 beds for next year. I mean, that's about half of what's needed. So that we need to be a bit more, invest more in our hospitals and in our beds and what's required. Also, a number of strategies. There doesn't seem to be any clear funding for them, and I hope I'm wrong in those. There's a national strategy for cancer, for cardiovascular and stroke, for rare diseases. I mean, if money was put into these strategies and a lot more work done to create awareness and preventative measures, it would actually save money in the long term, because those people would not end up in our hospitals and would be able to get the care they need. Also, in relation to women's health and endometriosis, and again, there seems to be no funding provided that I can make out. Now, perhaps there is, and I hope there is, but I would like to see much more investment in that, and for children's spinal health as well. And the last thing is the 500 million reduction in rural development funding is very disappointing as well, and that's going to adversely affect rural areas. Thank you.